Okay, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so it's time to call tonight's regular meeting of council to order. I do wish to begin by acknowledging that we are holding this meeting on the territories of the Sooke and Shawnee Nations. So council, look towards approval of tonight's agenda, and that would be that tonight's agenda of March 25th, regular meeting of council to be adopted as presented, please. Moved by Councillor Beto, seconded by Councillor Bateman. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 4, please, is report of the Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to highlight a couple things included in the report attached to the agenda. The first being is we are moving the annual community Easter egg hunt to join Pemberton Pete and the Pemberton home team for a morning of free Easter fun at John Phillips Park. It normally was at Ed McGregor, and just due to the size and increasing residents attending this, the decision was made to move it to John Phillips this year. So encouraging everyone to come out to John Phillips on Saturday, March 30th at 10 a.m. Budget open house is scheduled pending obviously 3 readings for the budget bylaw tonight. Budget open house will be scheduled for Wednesday, April 3rd between 2 and 7:30 p.m. up here in council chambers this year. Everyone will be encouraged to attend. Elected officials, if anyone is curious to talk to your elected officials, there's usually a few of them that rotate through between those 5 or 6 hours we're open. So feel free to come on by if you would like to talk to staff about some projects in the budget or talk to some elected officials about their future plans and future budgets. Sooke is on Saturday, April 20th between 10 and 3. Earth Day celebrations are Saturday, April 27th between 10 and 2. There will be a call for exhibitors, and looking forward to having another successful event that, again, elected officials will be there attending the event, and residents are welcome to attend, of course, and connect with your elected official if you like. From the HR front, we are currently recruiting for a Deputy Director of Corporate Services, Emergency Program Manager, wastewater lead operator, and in the final stages of interviewing for fire prevention life safety inspector, corporate services assistant, director of planning, and auxiliary bylaw officers, as well as engineering technologist 2s and lead engineering technologist. So lots of competitions and lots of interviews happening over the next couple of weeks here. So hopefully in the next few updates, we'll have some announcements for those positions that are currently screening and interviewing right now. There is, for some community engagement events, the DCC bylaw minor update. Stakeholders consultation is a virtual session scheduled for Wednesday, April 10th between 2 and 3 p.m. Invitations have been sent. If there's any developers or builders out there that felt like they weren't invited, they're always encouraged to reach out to staff, and we can confirm if we can get you included on that list. There's a school district 62 survey that staff and residents are encouraging, the school district is encouraging us to get residents and parents to participate in the survey. It closes Friday, April 5th at 5 p.m. As far as projects go, Church Throop Roundabout is progressing nicely. The roundabout is functional at this stage, and hoping to do the first lift in the next couple weeks of asphalt. On the first lift vein, Charters Road will be closed for an additional 3 days as the crews are mobilizing there to try and put the first lift of asphalt before spring break is over here. So short-term pain, long-term gain there. While it was already shut down, the crews mobilized and thought they can get that first lift of asphalt on that road to make it a little easier for residents and anyone driving across that. There's a few crosswalk enhancements happening. Church Road crosswalk on the Stickleback Urban Trail. There's a photo attached of that one. Otter Point at Rhodonite crosswalk is substantially complete. For Phillips and Grant Road by French, we're waiting for advanced signage and are going to coordinate asphalt pouring with another project to realize some cost savings there. The water expansion project. The theme of Local Government Awareness Week between May 12th and 18th is infrastructure. And with the substantial interest in this project to recognize and celebrate Local Government Awareness Week, staff are planning a series of tours for media and council, community and high school students at the plant. Staff will also be looking to highlight other key infrastructure projects during the events, and more details will be shared as we get closer to realizing these events. As I think most people are aware, staff are coming to the April 8th council meeting to discuss Highway 14 and future projects that we're working together on, and just to provide a bit more information and status updates to anyone who has questions. I think I will leave that there, and I'm happy to add anything further.
Thank you. Any questions for our CAO? Go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, thank you for that thorough report, as always. The crosswalks, those improvements include paint jobs and flashing lights, I believe.
Paint jobs and flashing lights. I can double check with Raf Matson, who can maybe provide a bit more context.
There's 5 crosswalk locations. 2 of the crosswalks are brand new, so they're thermal paint. The existing ones will just be regular paint and updated, except for Road Night, which was already thermal and flashers. And then there's some advanced warning signs too.
And you chose these sidewalks or crosswalks because of their high volume of foot traffic?
And feedback and requests.
Right, okay. Other question. So for our Ministry of Transportation session on April 8th, so public feedback was welcome, but the deadline has now passed for that, or are you still taking random comments?
Through your worship, yes, we can still receive a few more comments. We have a couple more trickling in. There is a form on our website, but we are looking to provide those questions in advance to Modi so they can be as prepared as possible to give as much information and respond to the queries instead of having further takeaways. So if we receive a couple more questions throughout this week, we can tie that in, but we are wrapping up the advanced question period on that.
Now, you also collected comments from us on council. Modi is receiving those as well.
Correct. They've received all of the queries that we've had come in so far to date. And then we'll also be compiling a public information package so that everybody has a bit more historical context in advance of the meeting.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'll look the recommendation that council receive the report of the CAO for information. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by La Jeunesse. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Public question and comment period. So this is open to members of the public here today. For any comments on tonight's agenda, please come forward and introduce yourself. And we have 2 minutes. We'll put 2 minutes up for you on the timer. You can always come a second time too.
John Broman, 7797 Manitou Road. I'm a little concerned and not clear of what's going to happen here with the new rules coming in later on your agenda here for the housing and stuff. What I'm curious about is current applications right now. I'm in one, I'm doing one right now. Is everything going to be put on hold on the current applications until the later part of the year or 25? I see some of the deals in the deal is talking about 2025. I've seen some stuff mentioned on house building and all the stuff that's coming down for the zoning and setbacks and you name it. But I just curious on current ones that are going right now. Are they going to continue, or are they going to stop and get put on hold?
Okay, so
Any
maybe
questions for the there'll be a question for
no, it's a
staff.
good question. Thank you. I'll see if we have an answer. Go ahead.
I'll start, and maybe Mr. Riley will tag me in. I'm gonna assume any application that currently in stream would still progress with the current bylaws. These are the current rules that we have to adhere to. So any variances or whatever would be based on the current bylaw. I don't believe there's any grandfathering period once new bylaws get adopted, but I can let Mr. Riley kind of speak to the zoning one specifically. I'm just doing a higher level overview of, like, as you said, all the changes kind of eventually trickling through. Mr. Riley's going to speak specifically to the zoning changes that are legislated to happen currently. But yeah, every application is just still progressing. We have no plans to stop them waiting for any of these other application or out of legislation changes to work their
I've
way
got an
through.
application from 2019 for a one lot subdivision. Now, being put on hold lots of time because of COVID, change of staff, just it goes on and on and on. I'm still at it here. I'm real close to finishing it off. But if these rules come out, do I get put on hold and say, well, you know, I'm not worried about the building part, it's the actual subdivision itself. It's a one lot subdivision, and will it continue to what I've been going with?
Yeah, so through the mayor, yeah, I'd recommend touching base with staff on that, and then we can address your questions privately. But yeah, we don't anticipate any holdups due to the provincial legislation and the changes to the zoning bylaw.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll run these things simultaneously.
I see, one more question is, or I see on the deal, it's gonna be a huge change in density on the lots with the houses, you know, I see the sizes going this, down to 250 square meters, you can run 3 houses. You can go 3 stories, but when you go to 250, all our zoning, I don't know if it's gonna change, but the density's gotta change. We've gotta change all our densities and all our zonings, have gotta come way up to be able to put 3 or 4 houses on a property, a small property. We're going from a duplex lot of what, 600 square meters? Now we're gonna be allowed to do the 4 houses on that, which is fine, but the smaller one, the 250 is really small. And if you go 3 houses, you'd be allowed to put 3 houses on it. Somehow some of the density's gotta come up. I think I got the smallest lot in Sooke and it was 275, 273. One down on the highway there.
Yeah, so we'll get more information when we get to that section in the agenda where staff is going to go and highlight what the province is mandating to us.
Crosswalks, I like to give a bit of input to your staff one day and yourselves. I think there was a real bad accident down by the boat launch, the parking there. I have property right there at that intersection. It's being haywire, the people wouldn't look at it before. I've paid big money to put a sidewalk there. There's land there available I had to give up land, and it's never been done properly. The biggest scare there is the culvert on the side of the road. If you got to walk on the north side of the road, Sooke Road, you fall in the hole. There's a culvert there that's not 6 inches off the pavement of the main highway, and it goes across Tomedy. It needs to be put a T on there. I remember my engineer looking at it. It was beyond what I had to do, and I couldn't do it anyways. It would involve highways and that, but my engineer said this is how it should be fixed so people don't fall in the hole. People, when the trailers are across the road, they walk on my side, and if it's dark, they're gonna, you know, one day you're gonna have somebody stuck right in the hole there. A kid could fall in the hole and go down the culvert. You know, it's very dangerous. So it could use some fixing. Tree removal. There's no line of sight when you come down Tomedy Road. You only got 80 feet of sight when you look up towards Sooke, looking east. When you're in a car, you're right at the stop sign. I can't get out on the highway, but I can only look 80 feet. And the guy on the other side of the road, at the same night, same meeting, where we were gifting money for sidewalks, the guy paid for a sidewalk from Maple Avenue right to Tomedy Road on the north side, paid for the whole works. It was around $36,000. It's never been put in. It's never been addressed. And I feel it's time that it should be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broman. Other speakers this evening?
Hi, Noah Dowie, Sooke. Speaking to agenda items 8.2 and 13.1. So yeah, 8.2, 5-year financial plan. Thank you to staff for taking council's feedback to heart regarding somewhat cutting back the proposed tax increases. It's also nice to see here the projected subsequent increases over the next 5 years back down into single digits. I know that affordability is top of mind for many residents and that in the region, other politicians and the media make a big deal out of these nominal percentage increases for political reasons without necessarily providing the context of the sometimes vastly different sized dollar amounts that they represent and of different communities' current needs, whether it be regarding a property tax increase or even a pay raise for council. It's important to keep in mind that here in Sooke, from what I gather, 1% equals a little over $100,000 in revenue for the district, which in turn equals something like 100 meters of repaving and adding sidewalks on one of our local roads. So I'm just here to reassure the mayor and council and staff that some of us are indeed paying attention. And despite the political heat you may get for this increase, some of us do understand that after a couple decades of massive growth paired with single digit and on occasion 0% increases has led to deficiencies in many areas, not least of all around local infrastructure, and that it has been encouraging to see the development of the transportation master plan begin to come to fruition. On another note, regarding item 13.1 through the chair, congratulations to the Sooke's new permanent CAO. It's always nice to see an organization promote from within like this. And from what I can tell, it is well deserved. So yeah, great leadership on that decision from the hiring committee and best of luck in the new role. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments today. Other speakers this evening? This is for public. Okay, so we'll move on in our agenda, please, and we're moving to item 6, which is our consent agenda. There's just the correspondence. So it would be that the correspondence from March 6th through March 20th, 24 be received. Moved by Councillor Beto, seconded by Councillor Bateman. All those in favor? And any opposed? That's carried unanimous. Moving on to item 7, reports. So the first one, 7.1, is the provincial legislation changes summary report.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this. This is the first draft of trying to look at the information this way. I just took the existing information on our website and added an action column to it. So I anticipate that this summary will grow and change. We'll put hyperlinks into it as we evolve and get more sophisticated and have more understanding of what all of these legislative changes mean. And we'll just, yeah, it was just kind of, I thought it was timely as we, at the February 26th meeting, council received an update on the short-term rental accommodation changes. And then on this meeting, Mr. Riley's presenting an update on the mandated zoning bylaw changes. So, because as you can see on this document, there's a lot of pieces that are moving forward based on the provincial legislation, and some of these other projects as well were underway as part of the development approvals grant that we had going on. So I just thought we would summarize this information in a different way, put it on a public agenda, and as reports progress through council, we will ensure this is updated on our website and other communication channels with links to what their council report said or what the zoning changes would be, or sorry, a bylaw change would be potentially. So this is kind of just the first draft of it. And just wanted to walk council and anyone here and or listening online kind of through where we're at as far as the priorities go and the timelines go. As I stated, the first one, the short-term rentals information was presented to council on February 26th. For a reminder, the takeaway from that was a couple of minor housekeeping amendments to the zoning bylaw, which will follow further on in the process here. And then other than that, we didn't have any major changes needed to support the short-term rental accommodations changes. So that is just more, I guess, wait and see what happens for people applying for business licenses on May 1st. And we will just explore and learn through this together. And yeah, go to next steps on this one once we know a little bit more. But as far as any other specific changes, there is no other specific changes the district needs to do. As I said, Mr. Riley's going to present on the small scale multi-unit housing after my presentation, and he'll provide with Urban Systems here just a bit of next steps on what this legislation changes looks like and where we're going with this as far as a timeline of how we're going to achieve this adoption that's required by June 30th. Another topic of conversation I know in the development community is around DCCs and ACCs. For those ones, staff just heard this week that further guidance is going to be provided late summer, early fall on that. So at this time, because we have many other pressing needs, we're not going to mobilize any staff time on those specific initiatives. So waiting for further direction from the province on those. Once that's known, then we will mobilize and start rounds of community engagement, talk to council, obviously with priorities for potential ACC projects, and go from there. With after the development finance, or sorry, I guess in conjunction with that, would be the housing needs report that is required to have an update by the end of December. So again, we were waiting for further direction from the province. I believe it was anticipated in January, and we're almost into April here and we're still waiting. So once further information is received, then staff will analyze that, update council as necessary, and work backwards to achieve the December 31st update deadline. After that one would be the official community plan update. OCP needs to be updated every 5 years and could include accommodations for housing on 20-year projections. As obviously council is aware, we have our current OCP in draft form. So once further guidance is provided from the province, staff will assess what that means for our current draft OCP, where we're going to go provide some information to council on updated next potential recommended next steps. Again, a future round of public engagement would obviously be undertaken during that time. This is due by December 2025, so we have a bit more time for this one. And it would be happening after the housing needs report, because that data set would be needed for the official community plan update. Zoning bylaws, as I've stated in here, we're doing the mandated zoning bylaw change right now for June 30th. After those first two reports are done, the housing needs and the OCP update, then most likely we're anticipating a second round of updates to the zoning bylaw based on the adopted plans for the housing needs and the OCP. And that's where we can take any other housekeeping items and amend those as well in the zoning bylaw. I don't know at this time what that could look like. Anticipated late 2025 or early 2026 for looking at the zoning bylaw again after we've done the mandated changes here. Council just on public hearings, just highlighting again, council received some information on February 26th on the public hearing changes. And the next steps is we are updating the council procedure bylaw, drafting a correspondence policy and a public participation policy development, and anticipating potentially at the May committee of the whole, or potentially another special meeting, depending on how quickly the agendas fill up, to presenting the next steps with those items to council for consideration at that time. Thankfully, the transit-orientated development areas and the parking around that doesn't impact Sooke, so staff is not currently putting any time towards those initiatives. And a couple other items that are kind of tying into planning and building world and developing world would be, but aren't specifically legislated changes. So they're just happening in conjunction with the development approvals grant work we're doing. Would be the community amenity contributions. That's been a topic of conversation for those in the developing world. And from that, we're anticipating giving an updated report to council presented by Mr. Riley on April 8th. And really just focusing in for that one on the affordable housing policy creation, as that was a priority of council. There was a notice of motion resolution passed by Councillor St. Pierre a few meetings ago, just asking for some direction and guidance on affordable housing. And we know on multiple files that is a sticking point. So closing the loop with council on that and what our priorities and what we're going to ask for is going to be high on the list. In the order to speed up development, this is one thing that will save some time. If we know what the policy is and what the marching orders are, then one less thing to negotiate back and forth with the developers. As council's aware, I believe on February 26th as well, we are doing a DCC minor update, and that is just Mr. Carter presented on that, and that's just to update the costs, the project cost in that bylaw. There's a developer engagement session happening April 10th. And after that session, we are anticipating presenting the submission to the province in the late spring here. The engineering team, operations team is working on the subdivision standards bylaw update to bylaw 404. Next steps on that would be a council presentation in May. Second round of stakeholder engagement May to June 2024, and then a draft bylaw presented to council in short order after that. As a round of stakeholder engagement has already occurred on that earlier. So it's now we're just getting some reviews of and a draft bylaw prepared, and then we'll do a council presentation once the draft is ready. Mr. Carter presented about new public engagement session for the transportation master plan, and this is to conduct additional public engagement on TMP road cross sections. Report to council was on March 11th about that, and I don't have an anticipated date of when we're going to undertake that engagement, but we will be working towards that in short order, and we'll provide some updates to council at the next meeting. And the last piece of that is the sewer specified area bylaw. So potential, most likely we need to do a review of that bylaw once the zoning and OCP changes are known, and we can properly assess the impact to our current sewer service area. And because, as you know, not all of Sooke is serviced by sewer. So from time to time, people on the outside will petition to join the sewer area. So obviously we've done a capacity enhancement at the current treatment plant. However, with these changes, we just need to layer on, as Mr. Broman was talking to before he left here, the impact of that density and what that's going to mean for our current SSA properties. So once that's known, we'll provide some more information to council. I don't have a lot of answers right now because obviously we're waiting for more provincial information to come to us, but as it's coming, I just wanted to kind of show you, we will start flushing this out and adding more information, but just kind of wanted to provide a general guideline of where we're going here and what some of our priorities are and how they're interconnecting. So I'll leave that there. I'm happy to answer any high-level questions.
Great. Thank you very much. This is a great report. I really appreciate the way it's laid out and then the links to the external information. In terms of where it's hosted on the website, just a suggestion, maybe it could go out in one of the newsletters, and then folks can click on what is applicable to them and get the information. At least it goes, it may or may not impact some, but I've had many conversations with the short-term rental accommodations where unfortunately some now are having to cancel all of their bookings. And so the challenge there is that these are not going to be affordable rentals coming on the market. Like they're waterfront, oceanfront, large, sleep 8. It's not, to rent a property like that, it like would be thousands of dollars a month because of the type of property. It's much different than like a small rental suite. These are luxury types. And then I've heard that some have come on the market because of the speculation tax, potentially, where folks that live elsewhere have decided to sell because of the speculation tax. And then the Airbnb, someone's bought it for the Airbnb, but now are hindered by that because of their beautiful properties. It's just the concern is that we have many smaller operators, fishing charters and the like. Now their bookings are going to be impacted as a result of the guests having to cancel here unless they find accommodation elsewhere. But at least this is showing sort of where things apply and don't. And then it's likely as the dates move, maybe just letting council know where to find it on the website, because I imagine this is sort of a living document that as more information is known, it's going to be updated. It's going to change. So thank you very much. Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, but just a couple quick questions. And the first one is related to the short-term rentals as well. And that is, do we have information on how many business licenses we have to
short-term rental operators, and I'm planning to meet with the housing minister to tell him about our concerns. We're trying to develop a tourism industry here. We have one hotel and it's fully booked. And so losing any percentage of our short-term rentals is gonna sting. And so I just wonder how many are registered and which ones will be affected.
I can answer that through the mayor. Currently, I think we're estimating around 30 business licenses for short-term rentals, but that number is expected to increase, I think, with the new legislation requirements.
Right. And the other question, not related to that, is with the ACCs, it says that we could use those for rec centers and sports facilities, I'm assuming. So we don't own any of those things. Sea Park does, and the Sooke Community Association. So can we use ACCs to top up the funding that we pay to them?
Through your worship, I don't know at this time, but that's part of the conversations that we're waiting, or conversations we'll have once we get that additional information from the province, because we had a quick meeting last week to kind of talk about it, and that was the first thing that we pointed out as well, is like, we don't have Sea Park, we don't own a lot of sports fields, et cetera. So there's limited uses to what you can use it for. So that's why I think we're saving a bit of time, waiting for the province to provide some more direction, and then we'll try and unwind this and see what kind of projects would work for that. Because we were talking about parks and like, how does parks fit into that? And yeah, it wasn't, because of the rec center situation, there wasn't an obvious thing for sure. So more to come.
Stay tuned. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
So just following up, I just note that ACCs also allow public squares, community art spaces, community museums, and streetscape gardens. So there is some deeper flexibility there. My question through you to Ms. Gray is these housing need reports. It's required by the end of 2024, and is that the Sooke timeline, or is that a province-wide requirement?
That's a province requirement.
Yeah. So I guess, there's going to be a distinct shortage of consultants. So maybe we should book early and often.
Yeah, well, we're working through a couple, that's definitely on our radar, is trying to figure out the most efficient way. There's only so much staff capacity to do these. There's only so much expertise we have on certain areas of these reports too. So it's definitely something we're all hands on deck figuring out, getting through these immediate short-term deliverables, and then are pivoting next to the housing needs to figure out what would that look like. And we'll provide some updates.
And would your funding for that come from what was it, 223,000?
That is what could be one funding source for sure. I think definitely I'm anticipating we're going to need more funding. Like the 223 won't cover all the engagement we're going to have to do for all of these initiatives eventually here. So, for now, we will report out to council as on what we're, recommending spending these funds on, but I definitely anticipate we're going to be asking for more funding for some of these reports as we run out of that 223.
Okay, anything else? Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, sorry, just to Ms. Gray, when you say you're gonna ask more funding, you asking the province or you're asking us?
Well, I mean, I guess that's to be determined. Like, we're going to see maybe other funding sources come from the province. We're not the only community that's going to be in this situation with not receiving enough funding to hire consultants to do all these reports, and we don't have the staff capacity. So, I mean, I don't know if they're going to offer more funding up potentially, if other communities push back. I'm anticipating it's going to end up having to be district funded, at the end of the day. I don't know the numbers obviously yet. We haven't done that.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's a fluid situation.
I'm just, I'm a realist, and you look at the math of what we got and how much reports cost, and it's going to add up pretty fast. And so that's definitely can be some advocacy work as well for council, is to pitch for more funding, because it's not going to be enough to do everything under the timeline.
To go, if it was, going to cost us some more money, then it's our job to start beating on the province and saying, look, you're foisting this on us. And we need some more money to get this done in the time frame that they're trying to get us to do this. Unless they push the time frame out again, which is possible too, who knows? Not much information coming yet by the sound of it.
No, definitely. As soon as we get it, we'll
Okay.
definitely update these reports to you and.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? So on that note, the recommendation is council receive the report for information. Moved by Councillor Beto, seconded by Bateman. All those in favor? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. 7.2 Provincial Housing Legislation Zoning Bylaw Amendments.
Yeah, thank you. So this agenda item is in relation to the provincial legislation that was passed under Bill 44 that requires local governments to permit greater residential densities in the form of small scale multi-unit housing in an effort to address the current housing crisis in BC. So staff have engaged with Urban Systems, who are here today, to conduct an analysis and assist staff in drafting amendments to the zoning bylaw to meet the legislative requirements to permit up to 3 to 4 units of housing within identified restricted zones. So staff is requesting here some direction from council at the initial stages of this project to help guide our upcoming work and in meeting our obligation as mandated under the legislation to make the necessary amendments by June 30th. So in conjunction with this report, we have Brittany Tuttle and Talia Mamura from Urban Systems, who will be presenting an overview of the legislative requirements and will guide the discussion on the points noted in the resolution related to building typology, building height, and parking. So I'll hand it over to them.
Hey. That one's off too. Okay, well, we can carry on. Thank you, Jaden, for the introduction. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here today. So we'll get right into it. So in terms of what we're going to be covering with you today, in addition to what Jaden has mentioned, we're going to give you an overview of the small scale multi-unit housing legislation and the requirements associated with that new legislation. We will identify for you what the restricted zones are in Sooke and what a restricted zone actually is. And we will lay out for you what the requirements are associated with providing secondary suites and or accessory dwelling units in Sooke, as well as up to 3 or 4 dwelling units of housing in those restricted zones. And then we'll get into some discussion where we require your direction on some amendments that we will need to be making to comply by June 30th here rather quickly, as those relate to housing typologies, off-street parking, and height regulations that we'll be permitting in the zoning bylaw. And then we'll wrap up for you with what our next steps are after this meeting today. Okay, so first getting right into an overview of the new legislation. So as Ms. Gray identified, there have been a number of new legislative changes that have recently come into effect in British Columbia as they relate to housing. This one that we're talking about today is Bill 44, which is the Housing Statutes Residential Development, commonly referred to as the SHMU or the SHMA, the Small Scale Multi-Unit Housing legislation. It can be fun to say the SHMU or the SHMA. Yes. Yes. Up to your own personal preference, how you decide to refer to it. We like the SHMU. So if you catch me saying that a couple of times, that's what I'm talking about. So this new legislation was given royal assent in late November, and it is now the law. And it was to help the province implement their housing plan, which is called Homes for People. The overall objective of this plan is to deliver more housing in British Columbia at a very quick pace to address our housing crisis. So it's focused on 4 main priorities: unlocking more homes faster, delivering better and more affordable homes, helping those with the greatest housing need in our province, as well as creating a housing market for people. And so through that, they aim to streamline the delivery of housing, facilitate an increase in housing supply in BC, as well as build more complete, sustainable, and well-planned communities. So what does the SHMU entail? Under the new legislation, local governments must now permit a variety of housing types on lands that are currently zoned for single family and or duplex dwelling uses. And these zones are referred to as restricted zones in the legislation. There's a much longer definition of what a restricted zone actually comprises in your council report as well as in the legislation, but in summary, it is what we have on the slide there. Which is a restricted zone is a residential zone that currently limits residential uses to single family and or duplex dwelling uses, but does not include manufactured homes. And I'll provide a little bit more insight on what these zones are in the district a bit later in the presentation. So the types of housing that need to be permitted as part of the SHMU vary in density and are tied to a set of criteria that local governments must meet. And I'll also describe that a little bit further as we move forward in the presentation. But in general, to align with the SHMU, a local government must permit the following types of housing on lots that meet the definition of a restricted zone. So you must have a minimum of one secondary suite or accessory dwelling unit, which in your zoning bylaw you define as a small suite on a lot that's within a restricted zone. You may have to provide a minimum of up to 3 to 6 units per lot. And the distinction between the 3 units or the 4 units is largely based on lot size, whereas 6 units is a combination of lot size and proximity to frequent transit service. But in Sooke, you actually are not subject to meeting the 6 unit requirement because you don't have any lots that are near frequent transit service or the province's definition of a prescribed bus stop per se. So we don't need to worry about meeting that requirement here in Sooke. We just need to focus on the 3 and 4 unit requirement per lot, as well as the secondary suites and accessory dwelling unit requirement. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So where does the SHMU's 3 to 6 unit requirement apply in general, not just in Sooke? So these are subject to a set of criteria, whereas the secondary suite accessory dwelling unit requirement only has 1 criteria that must be met, and that is that those lots are located in a zone that's classified as restricted. So I'm going to give you an overview on this slide of the criteria associated with when you have to allow for up to 3 to 6 units in your zoning bylaw. And some of these we'll discuss a little bit further as we move through the presentation. But the first one here is whether or not a lot is located within an urban containment boundary as established by your OCP or a regional growth strategy. Lot size, I'm going to discuss when this becomes a factor as we continue to move through the presentation. If the lot is serviced by a local government water and or sewer system, and so that includes services that would be provided by a regional district as well. And I'll discuss this one a little bit more too as we move through the presentation. Also population size, so communities with a population of greater than 5,000 people, as well as the proximity of a given lot to transit services. And so the transit one, as I mentioned before, only applies to the 6 units, and Sooke does not qualify for that one here. So the key items that we want to focus on as it relates to these criteria is the fact that Sooke is within an urban containment boundary as identified by the CRD's regional growth strategy, and your population, which is greater than 5,000 people. So these are the 2 key things here in terms of determining the applicability of the 3 to 4 unit requirement per lot. So here's the urban containment boundary that's identified in the regional growth strategy. And then again, in your existing official community plan, the community growth area, which aligns with the urban containment boundary. So as a general principle, any lots that are within restricted zones that are located within your community growth area must provide a minimum of up to 3 to 4 units per lot. And so I'm going to describe that in a bit more detail as we move through the presentation. But before we do that, I'll just go over the timeframes for compliance with this new legislation. So in addition to the timeframes for updating your zoning bylaw in full, as well as the housing needs assessment, you also need to ensure that you update your zoning bylaw to comply at minimum with these new legislative requirements by June 30th. And you should not be taking any action whatsoever that could be interpreted as unreasonable restriction of a use or a density that must be permitted under the SHMU. So for example, you can't go place a covenant on lands that would be classified as a restricted zone and say, no 3 to 4 units here. That would be classified as contradictory to the SHMU. And Bill 44 outlines the specific requirements that you must meet by June 30th. And it also refers to a policy manual that local governments must consider when they are developing these zoning amendments. And I'm going to talk about that policy manual a little bit today as well. Okay, so now getting into the restricted zones. So as a quick reminder, a restricted zone is a residential zone that limits uses to single-family dwellings or duplexes, but does not include manufactured homes. And so in Sooke, residential uses are limited to single-family or duplex dwellings in both rural and single-family residential zones, along with some comprehensive development or CD zones. The legislation at this point does not provide any clear direction on how to determine if a CD zone actually may be classified as restricted, and the province has advised that local governments seek a legal opinion on those CD zones. And so that request has been put into the lawyers to help us determine which of your CD zones may need to comply and which ones may not. So today we're just going to focus on the ones that we do know that need to comply, and they're stated on the screen here. So you have 5 rural zones and 3 single-family residential zones that are classified as restricted. And this is what they look like on a map. And that red line there is the urban containment boundary or the community growth area. Okay, so getting into the secondary suites and accessory dwelling units requirement. So the legislation requires that a minimum of 1 secondary suite and or accessory dwelling unit should be permitted in all restricted zones. So this is regardless if the lot is within the community growth area, urban containment boundary or not. You still need to permit this. And so those zones are the ones that we discussed on the previous slides, and they're listed here as well. There's no lot size limit for where this rule applies. So some of the lots in the RU1, RU2, and RU3 zones in Sooke may be located in the ALR, but the existing ALR regulations allow property owners to have an additional residence on their property. And these can be used for farm or non-farm purposes. They can have a family member occupy it or a non-family member. The rules are quite flexible in that regard. So the existing regulations in these zones in your zoning bylaw already do comply with the ALC's regulations and legislation, so there aren't any changes required on that front. For the lot size requirements for secondary suites and ADUs, the legislation does not require a minimum lot size for secondary suites, but it does require that any accessory dwelling units that are located on lots larger than 1 hectare, or that they be located on lots larger than 1 hectare if sewer servicing is not provided. So you can only have an accessory dwelling unit on a lot less than 1 hectare if it is serviced by sewer, as per the legislation. Further to this, servicing requirements for secondary suites, so if it's located within the home per se and not detached from the home, there's no servicing requirements for these necessary. And in terms of exemptions, the legislation only states one exemption for the secondary suite and accessory dwelling unit requirement, which is related to hazardous conditions. So if a local government deems that you cannot have a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit on a lot in a restricted zone because developing one of those types of units could pose a risk to public safety because of some sort of hazard that's present, then you can argue that and it could be exempt from the legislation. The legislation does also explicitly state that any properties with heritage designations under the Heritage Conservation Act or any heritage protections under the Local Government Act are not exempt from this requirement. So as I mentioned previously, just briefly, your current zoning bylaw refers to accessory dwelling units as small suites. And we have the definition on the slide here. So there's no change required there. You just refer to them as small suites rather than an accessory dwelling unit. But a total of 2,086 lots in Sooke are classified as restricted zones, and all of your restricted zones in your existing zoning bylaw already permit one secondary suite or one small suite, which is an accessory dwelling unit. So no changes to your zoning bylaw are required on this front. Okay, so getting into the 3 to 4 units requirement, which is much more exciting because this is where the changes are required. So if we're going back to the 3 to 4 unit requirement for the restricted zones that we talked about before. So these are within the urban containment boundary of the community growth area, and they must be serviced by sewer and water in order for the 3 to 4 unit requirement to apply. So an additional criteria here that I didn't mention before is the size of the lot. So lots that are less than 280 square meters in size and are within a restricted zone in the urban containment boundary and are serviced by sewer and water must permit a minimum of up to 3 units per parcel. If a lot is greater than 280 square meters in size and less than 4,050 square meters in size and meets all of those other criteria, it must provide a minimum of up to 4 units per parcel. And so based on your existing zoning, there are a few zones that meet this criteria that may be subject to providing 3 or 4 units. We have not completed the analysis to look at the servicing aspect yet to determine which lots within those restricted zones that are shown on the slide here might actually be eligible. That's the next step that we need to complete. We've just received some servicing data that we needed from the CRD. But right now we do know that lots within the RU4 zone, the RU5 zone, the R1, the R2, and the R3 zones may be subject to the 3 or 4 unit requirement.
Yeah, there's just a question here.
Yeah.
Correct.
Up to 3 units as opposed to the minimum of 3 units.
Yes, correct, Councillor Bateman. That is a point of confusion quite often amongst those who are learning the legislation. So a minimum of up to 3 units means that that is the minimum density that you must permit up to. So you can still, you can say someone could come in and want to build a single family home on a lot where the minimum density needs to be permitted is up to 3 units, and that's okay. It's just stating that your sort of maximum that you must allow for on the property is 3 units.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is. Why wouldn't it
is
say
fair.
maximum 3 units? Anyway, whatever.
Yes, the legislation is very confusing.
Schmoo.
Yes. But great question. Okay, so moving on to the exemptions. There are a number of them. And some of them I have mentioned already. Some of the other ones are lands protected under section 12.12 of the Heritage Conservation Act may be exempt. Lots are designated for heritage protection under section 11 of the Local Government Act. Lands that are subject to a heritage revitalization agreement that was entered into prior to the legislation being given royal assent. Where hazardous conditions are present that could pose public safety risks. So in this instance, if someone came in and said, I want to build a triplex on a lot where you could have 3 units, but maybe there was a steep slope per se there or something else that could pose a public safety risk, it could be exempt from the legislation. That's just one example, but you need to provide written proof from a registered professional indicating why the development would not be viable due to safety risks to be exempt. Lots that are not connected to water and sewer would be exempt, as well as any lots that are outside of the urban containment boundary or community growth area that I mentioned before. Parcels where the zoning allows for a minimum lot size of 4,050 square meters or greater may be exempt, as well as lots that are actually larger than 4,050 square meters in size also may be exempt from the 3 to 4 unit requirement. And so just so you are aware, we are still working to identify if there are any of those lots in the district that may be exempt from this requirement. So that's the next step for us. Okay, so now getting into the discussion component of the presentation, we have a few items that we are hoping to discuss with you today to seek some direction on how we might go about some of these amendments to the zoning bylaw that we're going to be working on over the next couple of months here to make sure that you meet the compliance deadline of June 30th. So before we get into that, I'll give you some context on the provincial policy manual that I mentioned before. So a component of Bill 44 is that local governments consider this provincial policy manual and site standards guidebook that came out shortly after the legislation was given royal assent in December. And so the manual includes a series of site standards packages, one for each type of SHMU compliance required. So there's a site standard package for accessory suites and ADUs, another one for lots that have to provide up to 3 units, and another one for lots that have to provide up to 4 units. And so these site standards were created by the province based on best practices applied in communities within other jurisdictions in North America that already allow for these forms of housing, and they provide guidance for local governments on things that you may wish to consider in terms of different types of site regulations. So those would be unit densities, setbacks, building heights, lot coverage, and off-street parking requirements. And where a local government chooses not to align their zoning regulations with the site standards or the policy manual, you must clearly provide justification in writing when your bylaws were adopted for the minister to outline why you chose to differ from the policy manual. So while they are not required, they must be highly considered, and you must demonstrate that you have considered them in your bylaw. So our questions that we have for you today, Mayor and Council, are largely formulated around the policy manual and how we may choose to align with it or are seeking guidance from you in areas where we think we may wish to differ from those requirements or guidelines. So the first one that we wish to discuss with you is related to housing typologies for the lots where 3 or 4 units may be required. For these lots, the province is recommending flexibility in the types of housing that would be permitted. So they provide a number of examples in the policy manual about housing configurations. So for example, on a lot where you may have to permit 3 units, you could have a duplex with a secondary suite or a accessory dwelling unit, or perhaps if you are on a lot where you have to permit 4 units, you could have a duplex and a suite in each unit. You could have a triplex with a suite per se. You could have 4 small homes on a lot, perhaps tiny homes. You could have a 4-plex. You could have 2 duplexes. There's all sorts of different housing configurations that you could possibly have to meet the requirements, and the province is encouraging local governments to be as flexible as possible on that front. And so here's a couple of images just showing what some of those housing configurations could look like visually. So the first one there is just your standard house with a basement suite, a secondary suite. The second one is showing a home with a basement suite, as well as 2 accessory dwelling units in the rear yard. The third one is showing 2 duplexes. And then the fourth one is showing what's like a 4-plex type development. So staff recommendation to council for this is to follow the policy manual and allow for a full range of configurations of housing types in the restricted zones that meet the prescribed criteria. And so we are seeking for direction from you, council, on how to proceed with these zoning bylaw amendments at this point.
Councillor McMath?
When will you have that data back from the CRD?
Yes, Councilor McMath, we've received the data back from the CRD just late last week.
So when will you have those numbers for us?
The numbers should be coming within the next week.
I'd like to see those first before we make a recommendation on the typology. And then I was curious, so you're working with multiple municipalities and the province as well on this. Sooke's a bit different. There's one way in and one way out. So we're also considering from a risk management perspective, not to mention the increased burden on our pre-existing infrastructure that we wouldn't have if it weren't for this mandate. Are you working with any other groups on how to capture some of that fiscal responsibility?
That's a great question, Councillor McCaff. Fiscal responsibility is a huge thing that has come up for many local governments in terms of concerns about development financing, and because rezonings are largely going to be eliminated as part of this new legislation. So something that we're really encouraging local governments to do is look at their development cost charge bylaws now and focus on that as a way to capture costs related to infrastructure upgrades, as well as really strengthening your subdivision development servicing bylaws as well, to make sure that you're getting all of your infrastructure requirements at the time of building permit if a subdivision is not required per se. Those are the 2 things that we've been exploring the most. Other means of financial related to municipal finance or fiscal responsibility we haven't been diving into.
And has the province mentioned anything about stepping forward and contributing to that? Because there's lots of little pieces in here recommending that municipalities go reach out and get legal opinions, right? And so you're gonna nickel and dime to death here, plus all the staff is trying to do this simultaneously with their other work, but that's not really feasible. They'll do their best, but ultimately other pieces will suffer. So I'm just curious if you've heard anything in terms of coverage or compensation for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, Councillor McCaff, we haven't heard anything from the province on that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I'm curious, what are these numbers we're getting back from the CRD? I'm clear on that.
Yes, Councillor Bateman, so the numbers that will be, there won't be numbers from the CRD, but the numbers that we will be running this week, now that we have infrastructure servicing data from the CRD as it relates to water servicing, is we'll be determining which lots in Sooke are actually need to comply with the 3 or 4 unit lot requirement, because those lots need to be serviced by water and sewer. And so at this point, we are aware of which lots are within restricted zones that perhaps meet the criteria. But we were just waiting for that water infrastructure data to be able to determine that next level of eligibility of compliance.
Okay. All right. I'm curious, your housing typology, you've cited from the policy manual each of the categories, with the exception of 4 townhouses I saw. Why was that not included, or is that you've said including? But
We just provided a general list
A
of,
general
of
list.
examples on the slide.
Okay. So is that in the policy manual? Is that a general overview of housing typologies?
There is a list of all the different types of housing typologies that are explicitly outlined in the manual
Right.
that could be
Okay.
considered. We have not provided them all on the slide per se.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Counselor Beddoes and Lajeunesse?
Yeah, through you to our presenters here. I guess I'm still a little confused. We're forging ahead and we don't know whether we can service these lots with water and sewage. So I'm not too sure what I'm looking at for tonight.
So Councillor Beddoes, the direction that we require from you tonight is related to the housing typologies that we would be permitting in the zones where the lots must comply with the new legislation. So at this point, we are uncertain of exactly which lots those might be in Sooke, but we know that there will be a number of lots that must comply with the new legislation. And so we're seeking your input on if we are creating a new zone, for example, and you have to permit up to 3 units, what do you want that mix of housing types to look like in that zone where 3 units needs to comply? Would you like to see all possible forms of housing where 3 units could be provided? So triplexes, townhomes, single family homes, etc. Or would you like to be more restrictive and say, okay, we are just going to permit a single family home and a suite and an accessory dwelling unit on the lots where we need to provide up to 3 units. That's sort of the extent of the question that we're trying to seek direction from council from.
Okay, well, I have trouble with that because it would depend on neighborhood to neighborhood as to what would be, suitable for that neighborhood. So I wouldn't know how to answer that.
Counselor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I guess the issue that I have is that if you look at the neighborhoods that we've already had developed here, the relatively small lots, where there's a dwelling unit with a suite, and that means anywhere from 4 to 6 cars, and there isn't enough room on the street to park all of those vehicles, and you can't even drive through those neighborhoods. And so is there any suggestions as to what to do about parking? Because as you pointed out, we don't have proper transit. And so we are and will remain car dependent for the foreseeable future.
Yes, Council Lajeunesse, we have a discussion tonight about parking as well. So that's the third item that we'll be discussing.
I think it's difficult to answer this one thing at a time. I think we need the presentation. It's just, I agree. It's just hard to take, it's difficult to visualize. So, I did the conversion because a lot of our I still live in the world of square feet and not square meters. So it's back and forth. I can picture square feet. I can't picture square meters. And when you look at what could contain 3 units is typically what I believe is one of our small lots. And now we're putting 3 units on it. And even putting in the small lot subdivision wasn't necessarily easy because in one neighborhood, we had a significant fire. And it was a really difficult time for our community. And now we're looking at doing more of that. But I guess in some cases, would this be, and then where? So if it's on a new subdivision on raw or vacant land, they can lay it out accordingly and plan for it. If it's in infill, then it depends on the neighborhood. Or if it's redeveloping older stock, then what does that look like? And then the concern for us is that we want more commercial and retail. So that eliminates, this just further makes us more of a commuter town. And where's the retail and commercial and that opportunity? And then when I look at this, it's all for those that can manage the stairs. So what about those who can't? We're all aging, sorry to say, but at some point, the ability to manage the stairs, so then I guess because these are all multi-level. And then we only get park dedication during rezoning, right? Like when we ask for parks. So I think that then triggers that conversation where we cannot just accept cash in lieu for park space, because then where would these residents enjoy green space if there's no park dedication? But I guess this is all zoned because this is all on these zones already exist everywhere. Like it's hard. You went through the maps really quickly. So it's just kind of, I guess, everything in the urban containment boundary could have up to 4 suites.
Well, with sewer.
With sewer and water, but that really is mainly our urban. Except, and then we really have to think about where we do sewer extensions, because right, when you do the, like when folks petition to be added on, because it's going to bring in up to 4 units per unit, as opposed to before, maybe it was just a single family unit with a suite. Now you could have 4 units with a suite. Or 4 units, not necessarily 4 units with suites.
You could have 4 units and a suite if you so wished to do so. But if you want to comply with the minimum requirements, then you would have to permit up to 4 units. You can permit more than up to 4 units. You could permit 5 per se.
But you could have 4 units with 4 suites.
If a local government so chooses to, but
That's a lot.
that's not what the legislation is requiring.
Okay.
So just focus on the 4 units.
Focus on the 4 units. Okay,
Yes.
'cause that's still a lot when we
It is a
have
lot.
approved
Yes.
single family unit and suite, right?
Yes.
And then in terms of the earlier part where water and sewer services, but if there's water and sewer going to the lot
Mhm.
already, then the suite doesn't require a second sewer, because this is where we had the sewer generation or the parcel tax +1 for the suite to take in that added capacity. But now that wouldn't have to be a requirement then, right? So then it would just be 1 sewer service for the property. Because that'll end up causing another problem for plant capacity in the future. Is that right?
I'm not familiar with your sewer infrastructure.
Okay, but going
infrastructure
back to
servicing
the
system.
slide on wastewater though, there is wastewater to 1 lot, it doesn't need 2 then to permit the suite.
That's correct.
So to 1 lot, then 1 wastewater charge for up to 4 units on 1 wastewater line? Is that, or how does that work?
I don't know that we know at this time. Like, I think that's part of the work is once we get the zoning bylaw done is to look at the sewer servicing bylaw and what does that mean for that? And how we build that out. Currently, I would say it's per unit and that would be 4 units, similar to the sewer generation charge is maybe the factor that would apply in the interim until we unwind the sewer parcel tax in 2026. But we don't know for sure at this time.
Okay, because then we'd have to really consider metering for consumption. Okay. Councillor Lajeunesse?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. If we can, since they have to have water and sewer, then we can tie our sewer charges to water usage. And that should be fairly easy to do, I would think. CRD will have that information.
Well, once that bylaw runs out, because right now it's set for a certain length of time, but then going forward, it would have to look differently unless we take on all that work now.
This changes everything.
Well, it does, right? Interesting. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, so this is the missing middle revolution happening right here. And the whole point of this, I guess, is to address affordability issues by giving potential homeowners and renters a vast array of housing options. So that those little ADU units back there, if that could potentially be a fee simple ADU unit, much like the ones Mr. Broman built out on Tomini. that they would be coming in at a pretty reasonable market value, right? So I can see the upsides of this. And I guess it'll be market driven, like who will take the initiative to knock down their current home and build something new. So it's not going to just spread like a virus across and a good kind of virus. I don't know where I'm going with that one, but yeah, so, and then there's that key point in your first slide that the province expects us. What was that image? It said, yeah. Local government must not unreasonably restrict use or density of use that must be permitted under the SHMU legislation. So if we put up a big stop sign on this at this point, so perhaps Councillor McMath's point about getting those numbers would be, but do you see the advantage of having those numbers before we make a decision? We're just giving you direction tonight, really.
Yes, correct. There are pros and cons. The con of waiting to make a decision is that we are under a very tight time frame to turn this around. And so if we happen to wait another meeting or two to receive direction from you on how to proceed here, then we are really shortening the window in which we can draft these amendments.
Councillor McMouth?
What's the penalty if we don't hit that deadline?
The penalty is not clearly defined. The province has indicated that we must notify them in writing once the amendments have been approved. And if they have not received written notice by June 30th, then they will be following up following that June 30th date with local governments directly. So what that entails, we're not certain.
Okay, why don't we get the rest of the presentation and then we can come back?
Sounds good. Okay, so the second thing that we would like to discuss with you this evening is height regulations. So the policy manual identifies minimum and maximum height recommendations for principal and accessory dwelling units, all of which differ from what your zoning bylaw currently permits. So if you look at the table in your RU4, RU5, R1, and R2 zones, the zoning bylaw is more permissive in its height regulations than the policy manual. So the RU4, RU5, R1, and R2 zones all permit a height maximum of 12 meters. And the policy manual actually permits a height maximum of 11 meters. And then if we look at the requirements for accessory dwelling units, those same zones permit a height maximum of 9 meters, whereas the policy manual is recommending a minimum height requirement of 8 meters. The only zone in the zoning bylaw that's a restricted zone, which is less permissive than the policy manual, is the R3 zone. So for principal dwelling units in the R3 zone, the bylaw permits a maximum of 10.5 meters. And for accessory dwelling units, it permits a maximum of 4 meters. And a point of clarification here is in the staff report, it indicates a 7.5 meters for a minimum height of ADUs, but the manual actually outlines 8 meters. And so for this one, our recommendation to council is that you align at minimum with what the policy manual is requiring, so that you still can have those higher heights that your zoning bylaw already allows for. And the same, so this goes for both a principal dwelling unit as well as a accessory dwelling unit or a small suite. And then I'll go over the last item here, which is parking. And so the table on the slide here shows the existing requirements for parking in your zoning bylaw for secondary suites or small suites, as well as residential uses that might be permitted within a restricted zone. And then on the right-hand side shows the policy manual's recommended requirements for those types of uses. So in the zoning bylaw, the off-street parking requirements differ from what the province is recommending. And this is where we're seeing communities across the province pivoting from the provincial regulations to address concerns that exist related to overflow of parking onto the street, where street parking might not actually be possible, particularly where transit service is infrequent, like communities in Sooke, or if active transportation infrastructure perhaps is lacking or doesn't exist. Other communities as well, a big challenge for them is snow removal too with on-street parking. So many communities are not aligning with what the policy manual has outlined for parking requirements here. And so for secondary suites, right now your zoning bylaw permits a minimum of 1 space per suite. And the province just indicates that you can have 1 space per suite as well. It doesn't indicate if that needs to be a minimum or a maximum for the parking requirement. But for the 3 to 4 units, the province is recommending parking maximum requirements, which would be quite a big shift for local governments and Sooke in particular, if you choose to align with the provincial recommendation, because a parking maximum would mean that a developer would have the choice to actually not provide parking at all, versus a parking minimum means that they must provide whatever that minimum space requirement is. And so the policy manual is stating in areas where you have on-street parking or there is access to public transit or active transportation infrastructure, they're recommending a maximum of 0.5 spaces per unit for lots where 3 or 4 units need to be permitted. And in all other circumstances, so areas where there is no street parking, there is infrequent transit service, or there are few bike lanes or other similar active transportation infrastructure amenities available, a maximum of 1 space per unit. And so if you look at your current regulations now, you're requiring a minimum of 2 spaces per unit for single family duplex and manufactured homes. And then for medium density, high density intent lot residential uses, you're requiring a minimum of 1.5 spaces per unit. And so we had this slide that just shows some different parking configurations on a lot. So what it could look like for having 0 parking stalls, 2 parking stalls in the rear, 1 in the front, 4 in the back. This is just kind of to help visualize what the different parking configurations could potentially look like. And the recommendation to council here is to increase the minimum vehicle parking space requirement from a maximum of 1 space per unit as outlined in the policy manual to a minimum of 1 space per unit and greater in areas that are outside of the town center. So this would result in a decrease from your current parking requirement in the zoning bylaw, which is a minimum of 1.5 to 2 spaces per unit. And the second recommendation is to maintain your existing minimum 1 space per unit parking requirement for secondary suites and accessory dwelling units. And so I'll pause at this point in the presentation because the other aspects are related to next steps.
Okay, so there's basically 3 items in total to consider here: is the building types, the height, and the parking. I think the height was the easy one. Parking is basically, I think we just go and maintain the maximum that we can get. And the building types, this is just me, would be the greatest flexibility. So all building types. It's a difficult one because we can't have public input on any of this because public hearings on these things are prohibited. So, and it's the law, so we're stuck with it. But it really messes up livability within the community. When I think of, neighbors and just good fences make good neighbors. But in this case is where we have challenges is when an emergency breaks out. And the services that need to get in to respond and get out safely. And that none of that seems to be of a concern to the province as they go ahead with this. On that case, and then you just have all the livability pieces that go with it. And then the concern I have is just what does this do to our town center and the ability to build up and get commercial and all those necessary pieces to make our town more vibrant. So all of that is just essentially be thrown out the window. In terms of where they say transit though, is that any transit? Because there's a transit bus by my house and it comes by 4 times a day at best.
So no, Mayor Tate, it's not just any transit. The province has specifically
That's the
described
transit, okay.
prescribed transit stops, and they must be providing 15 minutes of service between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
Okay, and that's where we're not in that transit piece. Okay, when it
Correct.
when it shows up here, it's, you can get confused because then I see it again, even though it doesn't apply. Okay. I don't like any of it. Counselor Beddoes?
Yeah, I don't like any of it either, but just a little clarification on the parking. So I think everybody in town knows that we just have a terrible parking situation with everybody parking on the streets. And now we're going to go from 1.5 down to 1 per unit.
This is
Did,
what we're seeking your direction on, Councillor Beddoes.
well, I guess that would be a no, but I mean, right now, I mean, I see what this whole thing is, makes a lot of sense if you're downtown Victoria or maybe Oak Bay downtown. But our people out here, even a couple like myself and my wife, our lives are such that we have 1 car each. And so if I move into the city proper and we're down to 1 parking space, that just will not fit for the lifestyle that we have to live out here, lead out here, because of where we are. I mean, it just, the bus service and everything is just no good. So we're going to be forced to take a 1 space per unit. So we can't say none of the above, can we?
Councillor Beddoes, you can choose a different parking requirement. We just need to provide rationale to the province why we chose
There
a
you go. I
different
gave it to you.
requirement.
Okay, I understand. Thanks. I'm not trying to beat on you. It's just that this whole thing I find is very frustrating. I mean, here we're trying to build a community and the builders want to build housing, and that's great because we need that. But the type of community, when we build these things, they're there and there's no going back. And I look at what we're dealing with now in some of these subdivisions where the roads are too narrow, there's parking all over the place, and everybody has a suite or a legal suite. And even the legal suites have two people living in them, each needing a car because of where we live. So anyways, I just find the whole thing very frustrating, and it must be pretty tough for you to work through this stuff. So anyways, 1 is not adequate at all, not at all.
Counselor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that one way around this might be to, and it doesn't work in existing developments, but in new subdivisions, rear laneways are one way of dealing with some of the parking issues. But most of our developments, or most of our land is already developed, so there's not a lot of opportunity for that.
Okay, Counselor Bateman?
Yeah, so no problems with the height restrictions. Interestingly, so we currently have 12 meters in RU4, 5, R1, and R2, and you recommend those stay as they are at 12. Okay, so with parking regulations here, so this is going to be market driven, of course. So a developer looking to is going to see minimum 1 space, but I can put in 2 if I so desire. So if he wants to sell these units, he's going to have to put in the 2. Now, it's interesting, at the session you and I attended today with the Minister of Infrastructure, one of our major developers who has about 200 units in progress here in Sooke. He noted, he looks forward to the day when he can transform parking slots into landscaping. But that day has not come in Sooke yet. And here we have the highest municipal average in the CRD of close to 2 cars per household, right? So yeah, so it's a certain reality. So by setting a minimum of 1, that means the developer can do as they see fit, basically. You know, a maximum of 1 would be where things got tricky, right? So yeah, I'm okay with that one.
Okay, there is a recommendation here. We've heard a bit about the timeline that we have to meet. And that's here in the report. I'll read it out and just see where it goes here. That council directs staff to begin drafting the zoning bylaw amendments to implement the regulatory changes required by Bill 44 Housing Statutes Residential Development Amendment Act 2023 in a way that is consistent with the provincial policy manual by permitting the following at minimum in restricted zones. A full range of housing typologies to meet the minimum 3 or 4 unit requirements, the height of a principal building to be a maximum 3 stories up to 11 meters, and an accessory dwelling unit to be a maximum 2 stories up to 7.5 meters. And that council directs staff following further analysis to consider increasing the minimum number of off-street vehicle parking spaces for SSMUH housing as recommended by the provincial policy manual from a maximum of 1 space per unit to a minimum of 1 space per unit and greater in areas outside the town center.
Your worship, if I may, the second resolution needs to be corrected from 7.5 meters to 8 meters.
Oh, I see. In the second point, 2 stories up to 8 meters. Okay. I'm just reading what was there. Okay, so that's the recommendation from our staff, just going through what's coming down the pipeline from the province. Someone like to move this?
I'll move it.
Councillor Bateman is moving it. Is there a seconder for it? Seconded for discussion by Councillor McMath. Okay, so on the motion, Councillor Bateman.
Well, as I was saying earlier, this is the province giving us some very clear and quite tight guidelines on how to move forward. The market will dictate how it plays out in every community in BC. We have a situation where we will be we don't have, as you say, Mayor, public input or public hearing. But between now and the time that zoning bylaw reaches us, I would hope that individuals within the community would reach out via the accepted means that we've discussed earlier, which includes email to council@sooke.ca and info@sooke.ca, and by reaching out to us individually to share their thoughts. If indeed this is the kind of, we're pretty early in the day here with this process, and I don't know if Sooke is one of the first communities to really dig into these kind of questions. And
We
yeah,
can't
I'm not
receive-
asking questions.
Okay.
I'm just thinking aloud. And it would be interesting to see how others play it, but we could certainly, I can see if this motion is defeated. We could be one of the poster children for the pushback. Because I'm really curious, in October, there will be a provincial election. And I'm curious to know how this would stand up under a new regime. Anyway, that's what I have to say.
Councillor McMath is a seconder.
I'd really like that data that we discussed earlier for that to come back, but it could also come back in the form of a map just overlaying those affected areas. And because it's going to touch on who is connected with water and septic. And then, yeah, I'm not interested in shrinking the parking spaces. And if we did, it would just be nice to have an overlay of that to see how that would impact the residents in that area, because we have these sort of hotspots where parking is a significant issue. And it really hits when there is an emergency. So just to have those two overlaid would be really helpful going forward. I'm not completely comfortable with the full range of typology. Again, it depends who decides to take advantage of this legislation, but I just think some of those pieces don't fit in certain settings of the community, but it's just a draft, so I'm comfortable moving it as it is.
Others, Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I'm still not clear on the parking side of this. You're asking us here to go against their recommendation and ask for more parking?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. The terminology is confusing.
It is very
Councillor Beddoes, I
confusing.
agree.
So that's
Yes.
why I asked for that
Yes.
clarification, because
Yes.
I certainly would not have written it that way. I mean, I guess you guys write manuals and stuff, which drives us crazy. But that's why I asked the question. Okay, then I'm okay with the last one. You're going to do some analysis and to find out what really works in this community, because it is this community we're worried about. It's not Oak Bay and it's not Victoria. We have to make it work here, and we need to have, I agree with Councilor McMath, we need some data too, because I'm not happy with some of the housing types, but I will certainly support this motion for a start, but a lot of people have a lot of work to do. I think we're making ourselves clear what we're looking for in this community. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lajeunesse, any comments? No? Okay. I mean, yeah, I think we're trying to make the best of a situation here, and then, you know, as much as I don't like it, we're being told this is what we have to do. Okay, fine. And then we need to absorb it. So, you know, I kind of want to, you know, do this step here, because then as we get on with our OCP and the housing needs analysis, then we can, you know, we need to figure out where we can control. And as we have other developments that may come online seeking extension to services, it's like, okay, given that this is coming, this now is how you need to think about your project and what that's going to look like, and whether or not we are going to want to add you or not to the system. And then meanwhile, we have to internally look at processing. So where will there be, you know, obviously a house that was constructed recently should be fine, you know, but if someone says, okay, I'm going to plunk another unit in the backyard, then what does it look like for the neighborhood? You know, and then as we also then look at what we need to grab for more park spaces, because everything's just going to become more crowded in some spots, all of that. So it's just making the best of you know, when another authority is just basically coming in and dictating to us what we have to do. And then we can't hear from the people about it. It's frustrating. So, okay. Okay. All right. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. More to come.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we'll move on to our bylaw section. The first one up. Thank you very much for your time with us today. We're in 8.1 here, zoning amendment for 6676 Sooke Road. So this here is that council adopt amendment bylaw number 898-600-100 2024. So that's moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Bateman. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. I'm going to just call people as it comes. The next up is our financial plan. So we've gone through various meetings here, and now it's in front of us in the bylaw format. So the recommendation here is that council give first, second, and third reading to 2024 to 2028 financial plan bylaw number 906/2024. Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, finance staff. To those members of the public viewing, we look forward to seeing you at our open house, where we can talk about this in greater detail on April the 3rd from 2 to 7:30 here in Chambers. There's no new business, so we're going to item 10.1, which is a letter that has been brought forward by Councillor Bateman from the Sooke Family Resource Society. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, this is a pretty simple one. I think Councillor St. Pierre pulled this last year, or the year before. It's a simple letter from the mayor to the BC Minister of Health in support of the market nutrition coupon program. And as we saw, it supports a fair number, at least 3 dozen people who are in need in the community to get fresh fruit and produce at the market and at the night market. So, yeah, bravo. And I guess this group is seeking support. So that's the motion. That council requests that the mayor write a letter to the BC Minister of Health in support of the BC Farmers Market Nutrition Coupon Program.
Okay, that's moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously, or sorry, any opposed? Nope, that's carried unanimously. So we'll get that going, Councillor Bateman. And then the next is a notice of motion. So this is just being read into the record tonight, and then it'll be deliberated at the next meeting. And that would be that council asks the mayor to write a letter to the BC Minister of Housing seeking additional staff and operational funding to allow an increase in the number of overnight beds at the Sooke shelter, and that a meeting be requested with Minister Callon's office and representatives from BC Housing to discuss the matter. So more on that will come at the next regular scheduled meeting. We'll move then to item 12, which is council verbal reports. Any updates from members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, for all that went to the chiefs and councils swearing in at the First Nations of Sooke. They had a very, very nice dinner and a number of us were there, and they very much appreciated that we were there to counsel the council and deal with them. I had a marvelous time, a great dinner, and they let us take smoked salmon home, which is even better. So I had a great lunch the next day. Very, very nicely done, and I'm hoping I'm speaking for all of us that we're looking forward to a new group to deal with, and great cooperation. So it was a good time.
Thank you,
Get on
Councillor
today. I'll
Beddoes.
let other people talk about today.
Okay, other comments from members of council? Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, I was at that inauguration as well. Wonderful night. The chief and council were led in by a young collection of drummers and the next generation. And it was a very wonderful night. Sooke Homelessness Coalition had another meeting. The Alliance, so we discussed the issue that I'll discuss next week, which can potentially be our senior bylaw officer was at the meeting, and she described it as a game changer in terms of overnight tenters in the community, being able to get into a safe and sheltered environment. As deputy mayor, I offered opening remarks at the Sooke Philharmonic's Tea and Symphony fundraiser, very much a Downton Abbey kind of event, where lots of credit to the crew downstairs. The Sooke Lionesses put on a great spread for all of us. I'll let the mayor talk about the minister's meeting today, or announcements today. But that was followed up by a really fascinating gathering at the library that our MLA organized with Minister Dan Coulter in attendance. And there were reps from a whole range of groups, Urchin, Sooke Shelters, Sooke Fine Arts, and many others, including the Builders Association. And the general message is Sooke is growing fast and we need a lot more support. We need more shelter beds, my favorite theme at the moment, community healthcare center, more childcare, essential worker housing, new home for the food bank, more below market, truly affordable housing, Sea Park expansion, and definitely less red tape. And above all, Highway 14 and our bypass route. So those are the infrastructure needs in the community, and we're one of 193 in BC. So we can hope for our best share of all that. And it was good to say that, yes, we have the ministry coming next week or 2 weeks from now to talk to council, and that we're getting our red tape under control with the new development approval permit review process. And yeah, several other things, but I'll close.
Councillor Lajeunesse?
Nothing much new to report other than I attended most of those events that have already been covered. It was great to attend the Sooke inauguration ceremony. It was good food, good friends, and a good time had by all, I think. And the CRD Water Commission, they're discussing 25% municipal assist factor to the proposed DCC rates. But we never did actually get to a vote because we had to evacuate the boardroom for a CRD board meeting. And so the meeting was postponed, or that vote was postponed for a future special meeting. And that's about it.
Councillor McMath? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I was with you at the inaugural meeting, so I appreciate that evening with the Sooke and wish them well in the years to come. This morning, our MLA hosted an event with the Minister of Infrastructure to announce the two funds that we received from the province. So 500,000 towards sidewalk improvements on charters and 500,000 towards Little River to Maumule Creek crossing. So this came about very quickly. I appreciate the provincial turnaround on the grant because that was a question that was raised earlier in the year by a member of the public. And how long would it take? But they did have a quick turnaround, and it was sort of a preview of a larger community event where we wish to celebrate and acknowledge the federal commitment of over 1.3 million and have the school students present, and also to highlight this way towards the sport box and community gardens and the Sooke River Trail Network, or you can come this way into Sooke and access ball fields, town core, and the like. And it's an 8-kilometer vehicle round trip to just under 1 kilometer walking distance. So very, very quick. And then it really will complete the Sun Run, or that whole trail into Sun River, linking up with Stickleback all the way through Sooke over, well, you can actually go on a trail connection all the way to Broomhill Park, which is really exciting as we get young people moving through the community. On another note, I was at an event hosted at Harborside Co-Housing. So this was a book launch. You may know Margaret Critchlow and Ronnie Matthew. They facilitated and raised out of the ground both Harborside Co-Housing and West Wind Co-Housing. And so part of that, they co-authored a book that was launched, and it's everything you need to create community-led housing. And it's a co-housing development approach. So the idea is that they want to share out what their successes, their challenges, their pitfalls, and everything they've learned around the way. So they have put this book together and signed it for me, which is really exciting. And I have a quote inside the book too. So that was exciting. I was the acting mayor when we broke ground on that project back in 2014. And now there's 2 of them within our community. And they've assisted with many more throughout. So that might be something the province should read when it comes to getting housing done. On another note, a lot of comments about transit. So transit has had significant operational challenges. There's been a shortage in mechanics, but they've managed to acquire, they're expanding the apprenticeship and bringing in new hires. But there's many different types of buses that transit is responsible for, everything from a handy dart to a double decker and many in between. So there's quite a variety of the fleet. So the mechanics are being trained up on the various types of fleet that is there. There's also been, as you might have seen, the bus driver shortage. That's all been done. So bus drivers are at a full complement. The challenge now is there's been a problem with the EV buses. That's completely fallen apart. So there's not enough buses and parts, unfortunately, to handle the routes. And so while the ridership is there and all the other pieces are there, it's getting the necessary vehicles. And so sadly, when I saw the news of that last the last hit through a red light, which is very unfortunate for everyone involved. There's other buses that didn't have just body damage, they had mechanical damage, and now you're waiting on parts. And now it's another bus that's out of service. Transit is still using the COVID relief funds. And so it's great to have that in play, but you cannot raise fares while you're using the COVID relief funds, which means transit is only funded, its operations are only funded through the provincial gas tax that had already been approved, the fare box, and property taxes. So if fare box is capped and the province is not providing any more operational dollars, that means the only lever remaining is property taxes. So be prepared that that's coming. And this year a fare review will be scheduled because it's frozen at the moment. We did receive Councillor St. Pierre attended as a delegation, as you know, from the motion that was passed. It is just to get more information from staff on what. It's interesting when you talk about fare increases and then we're asking for fare free, but that is in the local collection routes, like the 64 and what that'll look like. So we'll get more information on that in a coming meeting. So in conversations, when I heard it today from the province advocating for more transit service out here, we need more operational funding and more buses to be able to improve the service level. So unfortunately, it's going to remain as is. Transit is finding ways, as always, to find savings and synergies throughout the system, but I don't anticipate we're going to see much in the way of service improvements this year because there's no buses. So even with the driver, you still need a bus for that driver to be in. On another note, over at the CRD, early in January, there was some disruption to curbside pickup. So different stories about what was happening. They were all true. There was new buses, or pardon me, not new buses, new trucks handling the routes, new drivers learning the routes. And there was some issues around glass collection. All of that has been resolved now. I asked just about when we open new streets, does the intel from the driver experience reach the office? So when we're planning out and doing turnarounds and the like, what does that look like? So they did share that prior to a route starting, the route is scouted out in advance. And then there's different types of trucks put on different types of routes that can make different turnarounds in the community. But there's also new operators learning new routes and new vehicles. So I think over time it'll normalize, but as far as I know, everything here has been picked up and it's just getting caught up now everywhere. Some questions about why can soft plastics and other things not go into the blue boxes? That's a Recycle BC. It's set by the province in terms of what is picked up at the curb. So they did share that with soft plastics or styrofoam, they're high bulk, lightweight. They'll fill up the truck very quickly. And then it must be scaled. So that's the challenge, is that if all of that goes in, then it'll take up all the capacity within the vehicle itself. So right now it's Recycle BC that sets that at a provincial level. And then within the CRD board meeting, there was a whole presentation on extreme heat vulnerability mapping throughout the region and what areas are more vulnerable than others, as well as climate projections and what we can see overall. And it's sort of the general increase in medium temperature. So actually those were both at the CRD environment meeting. And that followed the the transit meeting that was held the day before. So there'll be likely more coming out on both of those, but I'll just leave it at that. For now, it's still spring break here in Sooke, so it's a good opportunity for everyone just to get home faster, I think, right now. Enjoy it. But I can see the roundabout coming into shape, which is awesome there, and that'll probably help with all of the flowing. So thank you for all the updates on what's happening in those particular areas in our community. And summer camp registration for parents has opened here in Sooke. Other places have canceled some of their programs. Pearson College used to offer summer camps. They're not offering that anymore. The types of offerings has scaled back. And so some of the programs are filling up. UVic had offered different programs. Those aren't running anymore. So it'll be interesting over time to get feedback into what families are experiencing in terms of finding the necessary programs for their younglings, because there's not the same offerings this year as there has been in previous years. So I think as we engage with the community, last time we did housing needs along with the childcare needs assessment, and that was very helpful in terms of informing what childcare should look like. And now as we plan more housing for the missing middle, well, what about the childcare piece? And what does that look like? And where, you know, in some cases, myself and others, we're going to be driving our kid all the way into Victoria to find summer programs because they're not available here. So again, more driving around, trying to get your kids into something. So more on that to come. But on that note, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn at 8. Oh, is that it, right? Oh, sorry. I would have said. Oh, pardon me, 15.1. Sorry about that. Jeez. This is a rise in report. I thought this was already done. Okay, 13.1. At the March 11th, 2024 meeting. So this is here, that council rise and report on the appointment of Rachel Gray as Chief Administrative Officer for the District of Sooke, effective March 11th, 2024.
So on that, I'm going to make a point of order. I have never been more personally or professionally disappointed in my entire life, let alone my tenure as a counselor. In my opinion, I have been precluded from this process, and this should be a celebratory occasion. And to be crystal clear, I am so happy for you. The frustration that you're feeling from me is due to the process, or rather a lack thereof. And so since you have opted to exclude me, I don't want anything to do with this.
Okay, that's fine, Councillor McMath, and just decisions are made by those that show up. So on that note, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
As
That's
a
moved
woman,
by Councillor
especially, you should
Beddoes
be
and
disappointed
seconded
with
by
yourself
Councillor
in that
Bateman.
comment.
All those in favor, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you.